To me, the Royal Rumble will always be main evented by the Royal Rumble. I know that over the history of time, we've seen a few matches, a lot like Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels, being involved in the casket match. It was sort of looked at as the main event because it closed out the show. But to me, like I said earlier, the road to WrestleMania starts with the Royal Rumble because the winner of the Royal Rumble goes on to WrestleMania to wrestle in the so-called main event of the show. This year, to me, is not overwhelmingly obvious who the winner is going to be. I know that there's only a few guys that there could be, storylines for them to win the Royal Rumble and go on to WrestleMania. And there's going to be a lot of other guys that just sort of fill out the actual number of guys that are going to be involved in the match. On WWE.com right now, there's only 17 competitors named for the show. I know that over the history of time, they've always sort of filled the pre-show out by having one year they had a tag team match where the guys competed in a fatal four-way where there was 8 guys competing to be involved in 2 spots for the Royal Rumble. So that's one way of always sort of filling out some time for guys to be involved in the match. But there's going to be a lot of guys that just sort of grab numbers and nobody's going to know who they are until they come out, and it doesn't really matter who it is. When you look over the guys that are involved in the match, more than half of them, there's no chance in hell they're going to get a shot in there. John Cena was the first competitor to name himself eligible for this year's Royal Rumble. I think that he is a guy that we can talk about winning the Rumble. Finn Balor was number 2. I think that Finn definitely deserves a bigger spot and a bigger role in WWE. The one thing that I learned from Raw 25 is not believe everything you hear about Finn Balor not being over. Triple H and the Clique involving DX and Scott Hall giving the rub to the Balor Club, I think all honestly was a really big deal, especially with Triple H grabbing Finn's hand and moving him closer to the end of the ring, closer to the camera side. I think that was telling everybody that's Triple H's guy. And maybe even if Vince doesn't 100% believe in Finn right now, there's going to come a day when Triple H is going to make this guy the motherfucking best wrestler in the world because that's what he gives us out there. Randy Orton is the guy from SmackDown. He won the Rumble last year. It was the rumored guy to win it. I didn't really want to believe it that was going to be him. But, he ended up being the guy that won it. I don't see him doing it 2 years in a row. Nakamura is probably my choice because I think this anoints this guy as being a big deal. When Nakamura was brought up to SmackDown, a lot of people thought that Nakamura was going to become the new face of SmackDown. So I guess you can say the anointed new John Cena to be out there. I think that he is the guy that we can talk about being the winner. From there, we just go to guys like The Miz. One hell of a wrestler. Rolling Stone might want to say that he's the wrestler of the year, but there's no way in the world that I think The Miz is going to win this WrestleMania. Then we're filled out by Elias, Baron Corbin, Woken, Matt Hardy, Bray Wyatt. These are all really good characters for Raw. But I don't think there's a chance that any of these guys are going to be walking out the Royal Rumble champion because there's no way to tie them into a championship match. Then we just go to Jokes of the Year with Aiden English, Rusev, Titus O'Neil, Apollo Crews, Titus Worldwide. Roof, roof. There's no way in the world that these guys are going to be getting it done. Ty Dillinger, one of my favorite guys on the main roster, 10, 10, 10. But he's not going to be winning this. Big E, Kofi, and Xavier, they're a tag team. I guess you could finally do the storyline that they used years ago where, Big E and Xavier wrestled in a tag match and then Kofi Kingston wrestled in the Money in the Bank ladder match. But I'm tired of talking about that. It doesn't seem like they're ever really going to sort of use this as a faction instead of just using it as a tag team in the tag team division. John Cena, I came up with an interesting thing that if Cena was to win the Royal Rumble, Cena could take an interesting technique where he says, I understand that over the history of time, the winners of the Royal Rumble have said they wanted to fight for either the Raw or the SmackDown championship. I want to cash in my Royal Rumble to have a different type of match where I compete against the dead man at WrestleMania. I guess you can say win, lose, or draw. There is a way to get Cena to Undertaker at WrestleMania, which I'm still not letting go of as my dream match for this year's WrestleMania. There was too much smoke for there not to be some sort of a fire where they're talking about Cena versus Undertaker at WrestleMania. And I think that, there's a couple different ways to get there. And I think somebody winning the Royal Rumble and basically saying, I don't want to use it on a championship match, makes the match at WrestleMania mean even more. Finn Balor, to me, is honestly one of the coolest and one of the best wrestlers out there. As of right now, it seems that Balor is going to be getting used a lot with this Balor Club idea that, basically the fans have been looking for the past year to 2 years. Since Luke Gallows and Machine Carl Anderson came over from New Japan Pro Wrestling. I don't really see this being the Rumble where he gets it done, but I do think it would be awesome for him to finally compete in the WrestleMania big match. Last year we didn't get him because of the fact that he was injured, and he was trying his best to train to come back, but he missed the deadline, and he had to, I think he came back the night after on Monday Night Raw, because I think it was just too late to enter him into any kind of storyline, to have the match at WrestleMania mean anything, and you don't want to just have this guy come out for the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. I think that honestly, Nakamura is the guy that if he was able to win the Royal Rumble, I think that Nakamura is the guy that could go to WrestleMania and have a really good match against AJ Styles, who is the champion right now. That is a match that we've seen in the past at Wrestle Kingdom 9. It was that one, right? Or was it Wrestle Kingdom 10? One way or another, we've seen this match on a Wrestle Kingdom on the big stage, and they were able to deliver a really, really good match. I think that AJ and Nakamura could plan out a match, whether if they wanted to have it sort of that New Japan style to show a lot of people a match that they've never seen before, where they're not going to be afraid to hit each other and just beat the shit out of each other like they did at Wrestle Kingdom, or just go out there and have a really crisp, clean, I don't want to say spot fest with a lot of oohs and ahs before, finally the winner comes out on the end. Definitely, to me, I thought it was a little funny that Nakamura was able to go out and defeat John Cena on SmackDown to become the number one contender to have matches against Jinder Mahal, where I believe it was Nakamura versus Jinder at SummerSlam, and then I believe 2 pay-per-views after that, when it would have been a lot easier for Cena to go into SummerSlam and sort of have the USA versus India match, instead of having the Nakamura sort of have Japan versus India, where Nakamura would get his first title shot against what was looked at as a weaker competitor than he was, and have Jinder overcome the odds and defeat Nakamura 3 times in a row. To me, I sort of looked at that as WWE saying that Nakamura was a big deal, being involved in the main events of these SmackDown shows, but they wanted something later on down the road where he would not win the title at SummerSlam. He won the big one at WrestleMania, and that is something that people could grab hold to and really think that this is a big deal. I'm really looking forward to this year's Rumble. I think that Nakamura, to me, honestly, is the overwhelming odds favorite to win it. As you heard from me, there's only 2 guys to really think of as a chance to win it. Roman Reigns has not been named for the Rumble, but I think that he is going to be in there. I would not be surprised that Roman has to compete at the Elimination Chamber from Monday Night Raw to earn his shot. So even though the Roman, I think, is going to be in the match, he'll probably have, Jason Jordan, Seth Rollins, Cesaro, Sheamus, they'll be pulling double duty, being involved in the Rumble as well. And for Monday Night Raw, those guys all have chances to win, but I think that when it comes down to it, I think that we see Nakamura come out with the win, and this is sort of like the crowning. He's the king. He wore the crown in freaking Japan. I think this is the crowning moment for him to actually be that main event guy for WWE and take us higher. For WWE, I know that they have the Elimination Chamber coming up around the corner, which leads us into WrestleMania. I'm guessing that SmackDown has some sort of show in February, but I guess it's not guaranteed because Raw didn't have a show in the month of December, and I've always heard that WWE is going to be doing less shows. But this is the kickoff on the road to WrestleMania. I think a lot of people are going to be going to New Orleans this year, one of my favorite places that ever hosted a WrestleMania. So, guys, I'm really looking forward to this show. Raw 25 might have been a letdown, but I think this is going to be a good one. All right, looking over, WWE as a whole, after the whole Raw 25 deal, we saw a lot of faces come back for the special episode. Every year with the Royal Rumble, they seem to bring people in, to the match, whether if it is, for a short comeback to the company, like in 2002, when they brought back Goldust, as well as Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig. I think that was a little bit about, trying to make sure that they did not sign with TNA, and just thought that maybe they could find somewhere to use them. Both guys came into the company. They didn't have the longest runs before being let go, but they got to have a little bit of a run in that Rumble, and we've seen that over the time. When they bring guys in for that one-off and then they come out and they get that big pop, I think Vince gets that sort of sense of nostalgia and says, hey, the people want to see these guys. Let's use them until people don't want to see them anymore. We don't have to have them win the Rumble, but it is going to be fun to see them wrestle on Monday Night Raw or SmackDown and keep them around for just a little bit, because I think Vince really does love the guys from the past. This year is going to be a little bit hard to predict who's going to be surprise entrants into the Royal Rumble, because as you can tell, you guys look at the sheets every day just like I do, there really are no strong rumors about people that are going to be involved in the Rumble that aren't in WWE's right now. Both brands, Raw and SmackDown, have full list of guys, and they don't have a lot of injuries. Plus they're bringing a third brand along, 205 Live, where I think a lot of those guys will be getting shots to go into there. On top of that, they have NXT wrestlers as well as WWE UK guys that are under contract, which I think really could be used on the show to add a lot of fun to what's going to be going down. When I look around what's going down in the world of wrestling, I have not heard that Bobby Lashley had been released from TNA. He was on the show just the other day, but of course everybody's seen EC3 goodbye to Impact Wrestling after losing his last match with the Feast or Fire deal. So, he is free for the picking. Some people have said they've seen him at the Performance Center, so he is somebody that could be coming in to WWE sooner than later. I don't like to knock EC3. He's a really nice guy as well as a really good wrestler. I just don't see where he really fits into Raw or SmackDown at this time, and I would not be surprised if when he did come in, if he was an NXT branded wrestler. There's no knock on somebody coming into the company and only being involved in NXT. It's always a door where they could go out there and outperform what is going on and get moved up to the roster sooner than later. I think Kevin Owens was a guy that is very well talked about, is that when he was signed to WWE, he was signed to WWE to only be involved with NXT. They told him flat out to his face, don't have your hopes up on being involved with Raw or SmackDown. Your place is to basically be an NXT guy. And after only performing there for like 3 or 4 months, was moved up to the main roster. There is no backup to this story, but I think Samoa Joe is another guy which could be put in that place where basically he got moved up to the main roster after overperforming in NXT and basically finally getting a spot on the main roster. No, that wasn't last year, the year before. I think he's been on the main roster now for 2 years coming up this year. Rey Mysterio is the guy that's always going to be named out there. When WWE always does polls basically saying, who are wrestlers not involved in WWE that you want to see come back. Rey's always at the top of the charts there, always been a real fan-friendly wrestler, very over with a lot of fans that, at the time he left, were younger and they're still holding on to being wrestling fans. People want to see Rey Mysterio. and Rey Mysterio coming back home to WWE is something that they really want to see. The Rumble would be a great place to kickstart that for that. As of right now, according to Dave Meltzer on the Wrestling Observer podcast, basically, he said the only thing keeping between a Rey Mysterio comeback in WWE is money. And basically, Mysterio, I think the number was going to ask for like, what is it, I think he said $3 million a year. And that's just what, WWE's not going to pay. But I guess that is what Rey is making on the indies as of right now. So I think everybody's seen the numbers about what, the guys in WWE make. That was a big story that was out there a few weeks ago. And Rey getting a deal for $3 million a year is going to put him at not the very top, because I think it was like Brock made 10, Cena made so much, and then Undertaker made 1, and the numbers just go on from there. I can't remember off the top of my head, and somebody's gonna say, "Hey, that guy was wrong," and I was, but I can't really think of anybody else because of so much things. Impact has some guys under contract right now, where they're using them on their shows, but there's not a lot of people out there that are big names that are not involved in New Japan Pro Wrestling. Like Chris Jericho would always be a rumored guy to be going into the Royal Rumble, but this year, he had the match with Kenny Omega at Wrestle Kingdom 12. They got sort of a present to use him backstage at Raw 25. But I don't think they would really want him wrestling on the Royal Rumble when he's supposed to be, helping out New Japan at the same time. So I don't know. That's a weird one that's sort of always up in the air. But I think as of right now, I don't think he might not have a contract, but I think that he is associated with New Japan, and I don't think that Vince is going to be wanting to use him in the Royal Rumble, no matter how big of a deal to wrestling marks like me and you is to think that a guy from New Japan is wrestling in WWE in a match. So I can't really think of anybody else off the top of my head. There's no real rumors bouncing around. There's always going to be that guy like Rob Van Dam that they might know is going to get a pop. I think it was the Royal Rumble 2006 off the top of my head, where he wasn't in WWE and hadn't been in WWE in a while, and they used him as a one-off, where basically he just ran out there for the match, wrestled in it for a while, got eliminated, and then we didn't see him again until he popped up in TNA years later. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of surprises this year, guys. It's just going to have to be one of those things. But no big surprises for the Rumble this year. Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. Going to be talking about the upcoming Royal Rumble. I can remember going back to November, thinking that there was a long string of time between Survivor Series and the Royal Rumble, and what they were going to do with WWE's Monday Night Raw, and how they were going to be able to go so long and make that show interesting and still be able to put out premium content that people are going to be able to stick with week to week. I know that a lot of people were sort of down on Monday Night Raw this week with the big Braun Strowman versus Kane match to deem the number one contender to Monday Night Raw. A lot of people thought that was sort of a boring show. Some people had the same criticism of the week before. I've always gone back to when TNA got out of the pay-per-view game. They still had Bound for Glory, and I still think they kept 2 other shows. But what TNA would do was that they would basically hold pay-per-view style shows on television, a lot like what SmackDown does today. A lot of time you see like a few weeks go by, and then all of a sudden you see a jam-packed SmackDown with 3 really big matches. Most of the time you'll have a WWE Championship, an Intercontinental, and a tag title match. Almost like a mini pay-per-view. They're on the USA Network. I don't know if that's WWE trying to help out SmackDown, trying to help out the USA Network, trying to bring in a lot of viewers to a big show that's going down. We sort of saw the WWE Championship change hands between Jinder Mahal and AJ Styles right before Survivor Series. Almost that way, trying to sort of like bank out a big number right there before Thanksgiving. I thought that maybe Monday Night Raw would do that, sort of having just a really big Raw out of the middle of nowhere. You know, as of right now, it looks like that Universal Championship match is going to be a three-way. You look a lot of the plans going around for WWE, of course, with the Elimination Chamber happening in February, right before WrestleMania. We know that the Royal Rumble winner will be able to pick the championship they want to go after at WrestleMania. I can't honestly think of anybody who's ever jumped brands and gone after a different belt other than the brand that they were already involved in. So it's time to start thinking about who the winner is going to be. And this ties in a little bit to the video I made about the triple threat, which is going to be going down at the Royal Rumble 2018, where you see Brock going up against Braun Strowman and Kane, which, of course, as of right now, is subject to change, but I think that is going to be what the number one contender match is going to pan out to be. I don't know if they're going to end up doing Strowman and Kane again, or if they're just going to end up using it the way it was and make that to be it. But when you look at February, you see that they're going to have the Elimination Chamber match, and the word on the street is that Brock Lesnar is not scheduled to appear on that show because he is not advertised to appear on that show. That, to me, sort of leads the fact that sort of says that, hey, the Elimination Chamber is going to be a number one contenders match. The winner of that will go on to WrestleMania to fight against Brock Lesnar for the Universal Championship. Of course, put the asterisk there. It could be Kane. Could be. Or it could end up being Braun Strowman. But that sort of says to me that, hey, start looking at SmackDown to find your winner of the Royal Rumble. Last year's Rumble, of course, was won by Randy Orton. A very forgettable Royal Rumble, although it was in the Alamo Dome, and it did have some really big names. Goldberg, Brock Lesnar, The Undertaker all appeared in this match. It went down in the Alamo Dome. It was looked at as supposed to being one of the biggest Royal Rumbles of all time, but with Orton winning, and Orton, of course, going up against Bray Wyatt at the Elimination Chamber, to me, it honestly was sort of a very forgettable Royal Rumble. Most people will remember the AJ Styles versus John Cena match that went down over the Royal Rumble there. And the Rumble, to me, honestly, is always supposed to be the main event, the biggest thing that goes down on the entire show, with the surprise entrance, which I'm honestly very surprised that we haven't heard any. But then again, other than going out and finding some past WWE talent that's out there on the independent scene, as of right now, just about anybody who's involved in wrestling is already going to be under WWE contract, or they're going to be under contract to New Japan, or going to be on with whatever you're calling Impact, TNA, Global Force Wrestling these days. So I think it's going to be hard to find some names that are big names to come in there. I mean, WWE being able to snatch up AJ Styles and have him debut on the Rumble, it's probably going to be one surprise for the books. It's probably going to be one of the biggest ones, honestly, for a long time. I think that in this Royal Rumble, you got to look down the SmackDown roster to see who's going to be going after your championship. As of right now, AJ Styles is your champion. He's going to be going up against Jinder Mahal at the upcoming Clash of the Champions pay-per-view. I think that's a lock for AJ to be able to win that. But then again, they just did one, but you could always see AJ lose that championship on the road to WrestleMania or on the road to Royal Rumble with one of those jam-packed SmackDowns that we were talking about. But sort of as of right now, plans can always change. Of course, last year at the Elimination Chamber, we had Bray Wyatt winning the WWE Championship, which was sort of a really big surprise. And he ended up going up against Randy Orton, which was the breakup of the Wyatts on the road to WrestleMania. And we'll have to see what can go down. But, who out there could face AJ Styles at WrestleMania and be one of the biggest matches of all time? John Cena, as a member of SmackDown, he could win the Rumble. Every WrestleMania will always sort of be looked at as John Cena's last WrestleMania. We have to look back to WrestleMania 29 to really have a high-profile John Cena match on WrestleMania. Of course, WrestleMania 30, he fought against Bray Wyatt. 31, he was against Rusev. 32, he was involved with The Rock. And then, of course, 33, he ended up doing the mixed tag with Maurice and The Miz. I honestly think that John Cena winning the Rumble, I think that he'll be a part of it. I think he is making his return on the Christmas edition of Monday Night Raw. He's always going to be a factor. I wouldn't be surprised if he somehow figured into the Final Four. But I think that John Cena winning the Rumble might be some sort of a long shot. Jinder Mahal, even though right now he's in the WWE Championship shot, I think that he might be a pretty long shot to win and go to WrestleMania to face AJ Styles. Heck, they might even go with AJ versus Jinder yet once again at the Rumble if they don't have any plans for there. When I look down, of course, there's some rising stars on SmackDown. You've always got to think about. I thought The Miz was on SmackDown, but he's on Raw with the Miztourage. But there's Bobby Roode. There's Baron Corbin. I think that they're honestly kind of long shots to win the Rumble as well. Randy Orton having a repeat victory doesn't really seem like it's bound to happen. Although if Randy does turn heel and go up against AJ, that probably would be a fresh match that I can't think I've seen happening, at least on my television. If it has happened, I think that I might have missed it. You got to think about where they're going with the Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn storyline. As of right now, those guys are sort of paired together, but who knows? They could wind up in the Final Four of the Royal Rumble, and one of those guys could turn on the other guy as well. I think that honestly both of those guys would be long shots. I know that Kevin Owens was on paper supposed to wrestle in the Universal Championship match against Chris Jericho, which ended up being scrapped because of how big Goldberg's return was at Survivor Series. They ended up having that match over the United States Championship instead. But I run through all those names of SmackDown. The one guy that I think that stands alone that needs to win the Royal Rumble to have that big match at WrestleMania needs to be the man that just came over from New Japan, wrestled his way through NXT, now on the main roster, even though he did have 3 shots at the WWE Championship on 3 various pay-per-views this year and came up empty against Jinder Mahal in all of those, would be Nakamura. To me, honestly, people, when Nakamura ended up going to SmackDown, thought that he was going to be the new face of WWE. He would sort of be moving into that John Cena role. And even though he's been in the title picture and had some big matches along the way, I think that honestly Nakamura winning the Rumble and going to WrestleMania, wrestling against a guy like AJ Styles, who he's had various feuds with through New Japan Pro Wrestling, wrestling at Wrestle Kingdom 8, no, I apologize. AJ versus Nakamura would have been Wrestle Kingdom 9, I believe, which I think that ended up being both. I think Nakamura ended up wrestling a little bit longer, but it was AJ Styles' last match in New Japan, besides for showing up the next night on the show after, which is like the Raw after WrestleMania, and getting beat up by Kenny Omega. And then they never had the Omega versus AJ Styles matchup. Just sort of Omega took over the leadership of the Bullet Club. I think that's a big match. I think it's a big match for WWE. I think it's a big match for wrestling, and it's a big match that sort of appeals to those New Japan fans who they're really looking at joining. Or they're really looking at moving the number in worldwide figures for the WWE Network. And I think that honestly, you do WrestleMania, I think that the fans in Japan are going to, see that show regardless. But I think the people that see AJ Styles versus Nakamura as a WrestleMania main event, I think that that's going to move the numbers where people who were friendly going to be, joining the network, would join the network even if it's only for the one night to see that match. Nakamura for the win at the Royal Rumble. Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. We are riding on down the road. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised. Here we are. We're in the, I guess you can say, the last week of December, heading into to Christmas, and Royal Rumble right up around the corner. We pretty much already know that they're going to have a 3-way for the WWE Universal Championship. But normally, this time of year, we are jam-packed full of rumors of, who the surprise entrants to the Royal Rumble are going to be, who WWE is reaching out to, trying to see if they would want to come in for a one-time, shock appearance. Sometimes they're funny appearances, sometimes they're serious appearances. sometimes there are appearances that turn into guys getting signed, like Mr. Perfect in 2002, where he would go on to become a member of the roster. Even though it wasn't a long run for Mr. Perfect, it still was a run. His last run, actually, in WWF. This year might be kind of hard for people to be sort of brought in as a surprise, because honestly, when it comes down to it, WWE has a lot of wrestlers under contract. They're going to want to use their guys from 205 Live, the guys from Monday Night Raw, from SmackDown. Especially they'll try to bring some people up from NXT, as they've done in the past few years. So it doesn't leave a lot of those guest mystery spots open. Plus, when it comes up to the point of how many guys they have under WWE contract already, whoever else is out there on the open market is probably going to be signed by TNA. They're probably going to be signed by New Japan Pro Wrestling. They might be under contract to AAA, as well as Lucha Underground. So there aren't that many true, free agents that they could bring in. This year, as of right now, one of the first names that I've seen thrown out there is kind of a time issue, but I think it honestly would be really cool if this guy was coming into WWE to sort of have his first appearance be a surprise appearance, and then after that you can sort of work out if he's going to go to Raw, if he's going to go to SmackDown, and he's a name that had a run in WWE that honestly, I don't want to say it was one of the best runs of all time. It wasn't like Bobby Lashley was breaking records, but Bobby Lashley, he was in the title hunt. He had matches against John Cena for the WWE Championship. He was the ECW champion, wrestled in possibly one of the biggest WrestleManias of all time against Umaga, which was basically Vince versus Donald Trump, the Battle of the Billionaires. Where basically Vince McMahon got his head shaved. And, since Bobby Lashley left the company on, sort of bad terms, everybody's heard the story between him and Doc Hendricks, and basically just finding a way to get his release, and then from there he went on to fight for Bellator, as well as, wrestling for Impact Wrestling. He had a really good run there, being one of the big-time champions of the company, and being one of the guys like Bobby Roode that would sort of keep them afloat after the time that they lost, Kurt Angle, Sting, AJ Styles, a lot of those guys. To me, honestly, I haven't heard about Bobby Lashley fighting for Bellator in a while. I don't know if he ever ended up losing a fight, or maybe if they just sort of lost interest because of his age. Maybe the deal between, Bellator being featured on Spike and, TNA Impact no longer being on Spike television. Maybe they just didn't want to, feature the guy that much because of the way that those two companies ended up breaking up and going in their separate directions. TNA now on their second network since leaving Spike, possibly one of the biggest blows to that company that there's ever been. I really think that Bobby Lashley coming into WWE is truly going to be a possibility in the future. I don't know when his contract runs out with TNA or Global Impact or whatever they're calling it this week. But Bobby Lashley entering into the Royal Rumble this year, I think, is a real true possibility. Also, rumors out there of EC3 leaving the company sooner than later, and we'll see where this goes from here. Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. After the last night's WWE Clash of the Champions, it is officially Royal Rumble season, as we are almost on the road to WrestleMania. One thing that makes the Royal Rumble one of the freshest and one of the most funnest matches after all of these years being in existence is the surprise returns to the company. Maybe even a debut of somebody who's never been in WWE before, just seeing a fresh face or even a legend that we haven't seen. I talked about this in an early video, talking about Bobby Lashley maybe making the jump from Global Force Wrestling and coming and joining WWE, is that there are so many wrestlers out there that are signed up by WWE already as it is. There's not many guys that are out there that aren't signed by Global Force Wrestling or under contract to New Japan Wrestling. I know that they're more than likely going to be wanting to use people from Raw, from SmackDown. They're going to be wanting to use people from 205 Live. They're probably even going to be wanting to bring in some of the guys that were a part of the European tournament that went down this year. So, I mean, it's hard to even find a number for somebody to take, for somebody to come in there. As of right now, a guy that we've been making this video about, honestly, for a few years, because when it comes down to it, I know that this guy is one of the biggest names in professional wrestling, even without the machine of WWE behind him. But it just seems like WWE is the best spot for this guy to be, because it just fits him so well. He's basically a human cartoon character that has been there for so long that, you know, it just seems like that's the place that he should be. And that, of course, is Rey Mysterio. Rey Mysterio, of course, you know, had a very, very bad breakup with WWE a few years ago, which was led by him, you know, wanting to get out of the company, maybe wrestle for AAA. You know, Rey Mysterio has been wrestling less and making a good deal of money out there on the independents. You know, when they post lists of, you know, what the wrestlers' demands are to work certain independents, Rey Mysterio is one of the guys bringing in possibly the most money of anybody out there working the independent circuit. But I think, like everybody, you know, wants Rey to come back. And, you know, on the Wrestling Observer podcast today during the Q&A, Dave Meltzer was asked about Rey Mysterio returning to the company because there were talks a few months ago. Of course, you know, I really don't know what is going on with Lucha Underground. I've heard that, you know, it is coming back for a 4th season, but I've also heard that the money is pretty much gutted out of the company. I don't know if Rey Mysterio is already under contract to stay for that last you know, set of tapings, or if he would be able to be free to go. I know that there's a lot of people, a lot of the contracts that were up for Lucha Underground, a lot of those guys are up, and now those guys are free agents to either leave, or if they want to stay and stay there, they can. To me, honestly, I mean, Lucha Underground was really, really hot the first year. And, you know, after it took that sort of long hiatus before coming back and having season 2 and season 3, I don't really hear people talk about it like I once did. I remember hearing people talk about how great that show was, that was one of the reasons that they loved to watch wrestling. And, of course, I think it was Rey Mysterio who debuted either in the season finale, or he debuted in the season premiere of season 2. But Rey Mysterio, Dave Meltzer said that, you know, if he was offered $3 million a year, which is possibly what he's making on the independent scene, maybe he would think of coming back for that one last run. I know that, you know, it was looking really great, and at this time, Jeff Hardy is injured. But just look how big, you know, it was when the Hardys came back at WrestleMania 33. They really set the world afire. These are guys that people want to see, and they want to see them in WWE, even though the Hardys were able to be seen on Global Force Impact Wrestling week in and week out. People want them to be home. And just like that, Rey Mysterio's home should be WWE. Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. It seems the strong rumor of the day is that EC3 is heading to WWE. Today he was spotted at the Performance Center, and people are saying that he might even be making his debut at the Royal Rumble. This is a rumor that's been around for a while. I made a video a few weeks back about Bobby Lashley being a surprise entrant in the Royal Rumble this year. Basically talking about Lashley's contract and EC3's contract are two of the biggest contracts in TNA Impact Global Force Wrestling, and that they more than likely will not be with the company anymore. And if anybody was going to be jumping to WWE, it was probably going to be EC3 and Bobby Lashley. But at the time, I thought that Bobby Lashley had the biggest chance of making the jump, because honestly, I'm not going to say that, you know, Derek Bateman didn't blow it up in the WWE, But I honestly believe that I just don't know what EC3 brings to the table. A little bit of me is hoping that, honestly, hopes that EC3 is making the jump to WWE. I think it would be really cool, especially with the new rules that are in place over there at Impact Wrestling, that basically, all your intellectual property, I think is the right words, you're able to take with you when you leave, even if it is something that TNA made up for you. That they don't hold the rights to it. They're not looking forward to stretching out a long court case like they did with the Hardys. Anything that your character comes up with or anything you're able to take with you when you leave. They just care about basically making wrestling television, putting it on TV, and selling tickets and trying to make money that way. To me, honestly, if EC3 shows up in WWE with that name, it honestly is probably one of the coolest things since the Raw Anonymous General Manager was almost released as being Mick Foley. To me, it would have been awesome if Foley was the Anonymous Raw General Manager, seeing how that whole storyline was taking place when Mick Foley was wrestling and being the sort of commissioner of TNA. Basically being like, even though I'm working for the other company, I'm still watching this show and running it from the other side. That almost happened. To me, honestly, when I think about EC3, I think about it being Ethan Carter III, being the nephew of Dixie Carter, and somebody wrestling in WWE whose character is supposed to be the nephew of Dixie Carter, who was the then owner of TNA. I guess they could do it. I mean, Vince brought Eric Bischoff in to run Monday Night Raw, and some people thought that was the way of Vince showing the world that he had won the war against WCW and he had beat the other side so bad that they were coming to work for him now, that he had put the other company out of business. I don't think the war between TNA and WWE ever really got that strong. That I would bet you money that there's that story out there that Vince doesn't even know that Luke Gallows was Festus, and he wants to keep it that way. I bet you there's a real strong chance that Vince doesn't even know who EC3 is, or I bet you he doesn't even know what EC3 stands for. EC3 as a name right now, Ethan Carter III, it was made up because of, at the time, RG3 was the hot quarterback coming out of college, going into the NFL draft. He went #1 overall. He was supposed to get drafted by the Rams, but they ended up trading the pick to the Redskins, and they gave up a whole bunch of picks, and it was a big deal. He came into the Redskins. He had a really good season, but I think in actually the playoff game is when he hurt his knee, and he was never ever the same. He ended up popping up in Cleveland for a hot minute, but they were able to expose that the knee is just, it ain't gonna work. RC3 will never be RC3 again. So I would wonder if they're going to be forced to change his name, or maybe just call him Ethan Carter, and then that's it. Or I don't know how you get over all that other stuff at the time. But I don't really see him going back to wrestling as Derek Bateman. Derek Bateman, of course, was the guy that wrestled, I believe, for FCW at the time, and then he popped up on that season of NXT. Probably, I guess that would be like season 3 or season 4, the season that never ended. Basically, they had said that they were going to have an ending to the show, but decided they didn't want to have another season, but they didn't want to stop the show, so it just kept going. I don't know where EC3 fits into WWE. I know that we've seen guys like Rusev, and I know we've seen guys like 10-10-10 show up in the Royal Rumble, and it's not counted as their true debuts in WWE. It just sort of like, hey, this is something that's soon to come, coming out of NXT. but I don't see if EC3 is going to be a part of NXT, that they would have him debut in the Royal Rumble and then go to NXT. So I guess the writing is on the wall. I can't say that this isn't going to happen, but I just don't know what they do with it once he finally is able to show up and actually work there. Hey! What is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. We're driving down the road. We're going home from work. As of right now, we're 1 week out from the Royal Rumble. And as of right now, I still believe that my pick is going to be that Shinsuke Nakamura is going to be winning the Royal Rumble, going on to WrestleMania, and having my dream match in WWE against AJ Styles. But in this last week, there has been this outpouring rumor that will not go away. Every year, there is a rumor, normally that someone's going to appear in the Royal Rumble, but I cannot remember a time when there was this far off of a wild idea that someone was going to win the Royal Rumble. That was a real rumor that just didn't make any sense. I can honestly tell you that for the past few years that we've looked at the Royal Rumble, I thought that we've been able to sort of look at the pack of guys that are going to be in there, look at the storylines that are going in WWE, and honestly thought that it was an easy pick. You can tell that there's normally, 2 or 3 guys that they like to put in the discussion that have a chance to win the Royal Rumble, but you can tell that the batch of writers that they have in WWE make it very, very obvious who's going to win the Rumble each and every year, whether if it's been Roman Reigns, whether if it's been Triple H, even Sheamus, Batista. I mean, very rarely. Last year, I can remember there was 3 guys. I said, this is the guy who's going to win the Rumble, and this is, basically anybody else who has a chance. And it was like Randy Orton, Baron Corbin, and I think John Cena. And that was it. This year, people are really holding on to this whole Daniel Bryan winning the Rumble to sort of show up SmackDown and Shane McMahon to not really help out Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, but to sort of, just show up Shane McMahon for not doing the right thing. Shane's a really good commissioner, but he lets his heart and his gut get in the way when he makes decisions, and he's not doing it fair. And Daniel Bryan's trying to prove it to him, and by proving it, it's basically turning him into a bad guy. So the only way that I can see this Daniel Bryan thing come to fruition is that basically Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn fall short in beating AJ Styles. I already said in another video that I thought that AJ Styles was going to win the match against Sami and Kevin Owens one way or another. He's going to walk out as the WWE champion. But now I would guess that Sami and Kevin Owens have to find a way to get into the Royal Rumble. And I don't know how they get into the Rumble and then also find a way to sort of bend the odds and cheat, whether if they do the good old Stone Cold Steve Austin trick, or they get thrown out of the Rumble and they try to sneak back in, and then Shane comes running down trying to right the wrongs of the referees by letting them get back in, and Shane tries to be the one to eliminate Owens and Zayn by getting involved in the match. Now, for Daniel Bryan to win the Rumble, he has to be an active competitor. How does Daniel Bryan even get to the point where he picks a number? Are they just going to tell a story that basically Daniel Bryan knew that Shane was going to get involved in the match? So basically he just gave himself a number when it was time for everybody to draw. I mean, it's not like they have a Sean O'Hare walking around backstage, basically telling people to do what they already think that they want to do. And Bryan just reaches in the bin and picks out a number. I don't know. That's the whole part of the story that doesn't make sense. I'm not telling you that if I'm not sitting on my couch watching the Royal Rumble on Sunday and Daniel Bryan finds a way to win the Rumble, then I'm not going to be marking out being the gladdest guy in the room that I'm wrong. But as a wrestling fan, I don't see how the hell this is honestly possible. And for somebody to go out there, I am conspiracy guru number one. I believe that the whole Montreal Screwjob was a work. And I've believed 1,000 other things in wrestling that to a lot of people are slam dunk. This is just the way it is. I think a lot of things in wrestling are that way, that they make you look one way when it was really something else. But for, Daniel Bryan to basically go on every interview and every podcast that he can, and in the nicest way possible, basically badmouth WWE for not letting him wrestle because of the wellness policy. Daniel Bryan, how he gets away with this, I honestly don't know. Whether if he honestly knows that he has WWE, because without Daniel Bryan on Total Bellas and Total Divas, maybe Brie backs out and doesn't want to be a part of the show anymore. And without having both Bellas on the show, you can't have Total Bellas. Maybe Total Divas is able to go on, but I honestly think that one of the main draws on the show is the Bellas. And to me, one of the draws when I sit down to watch Total Divas is Daniel Bryan and John Cena. Without them, I like Rusev. I like, I guess Tyson Kidd's not really on the show that much anymore because of the injury deal. I like the Uso guy, but, I can live without that shit. I want to see Bryan and Cena. I want to see two of the biggest names that were in wrestling. I want to see what they're portrayed like on the show. That was one of the main drawing points to me when it first came out. I didn't give a damn about Eva Marie and all them, but I wanted to see, Bryan and Cena behind the scenes to see what was going on with that. So I don't know if basically just Daniel Bryan knows that, they might be able to let his contract expire someday, but they can't fire him because of the place that he's in and being married to the Bellas, as well as being involved on both reality shows on E! When it came down to it, if he was the general manager and he was just saying the stuff that he was saying, I think that they would have let him go a long time ago. You didn't see Teddy Long popping off when he was doing interviews and things like that. But he's basically badmouthed the wellness policy, basically calling into question how they look at concussions and CTE, and basically saying that, this is the way they think about it, but it's not the way that, others think about it. And, he's gone out of his way to prove through tests that, he is, in the right well-being to wrestle without risk of hurting himself or anyone else or his life and his career. He just wants to do what he's always done, and he's willing to leave the company to do that, and he's proved his point. So I don't really honestly think that they would sit down and say, hey, the Royal Rumble, this is when we just clear this out and basically let this guy get back to wrestling, because he's been cleared by people at top colleges and hospitals across the country that I guess Dr. Maroon would back up, and just say, well, I guess he's good enough to wrestle. It is what it is. I don't think that's going to happen. That's just me saying that I bet against the odds. I'm not sure if right now he is the favorite. I still think that Nakamura is the easiest pick to do it. If I'm not picking Nakamura, honestly, I'm picking John Cena. And if it's not Cena, I honestly don't know who else it could be. I don't really see anybody else on the roster. But then again, with it being the SmackDown Championship, and as good as AJ Styles is, I really think it's going to be somebody from SmackDown. I think if they did a wild finish and Baron Corbin ended up winning, or Rusev ended up winning, I'm not saying that at WrestleMania they wouldn't have a good match. It's the SmackDown Championship match. It's not supposed to be the main event. It's just supposed to be sort of talked about like it is and treat it like it is, because it's for a championship. Everybody knows that, you know, there's normally one sort of a draw match that brings you to the table. There's normally like sort of like a Triple H match that gets a big draw. Kurt Angle's probably going to have one, and whatever's going on with Roman Reigns will probably be the real main event. So I mean, that's the way I think of it. So let me know what you guys think, if Daniel Bryan's really got a shot, because as of right now, I mean, it'd be dumb for anybody to take that bet, because basically you're taking Daniel Bryan and I'm taking the field of everybody else. But I don't think that Bryan has a shot to win it. That's just me. I don't think it's going to happen. Fairy tale.